My name is Margaret. I am 76 years old, and I never thought the words from my own two sons would one day cut me deeper than any stranger's insult. You can stay, Mom, if you babysit. That's what they told me the night they slid a diaper bag into my lap, as if I were nothing more than the hired help. I sat in that $7.5 million house, my house, though they didn't know it. Marble floors stretched across the living room, chandeliers hung from ceilings I had chosen myself, and laughter from their wives and children echoed down the hallways. Yet not a single piece of that home would have existed without me. Every brick, every tile, every corner of that mansion was built with the money I had secretly provided. But my sons had forgotten, or rather, they had never known. I had hidden the truth for years, letting them believe their father's business deals had funded this home, when in reality, I had been the one pulling strings behind closed doors. I thought keeping my power hidden would bring me peace in my old age. Instead, it became the very weapon they would try to use against me. That evening, they told me I could remain in their house only if I changed diapers, cooked meals, and fetched water for their children. I looked at my wrinkled hands clutching the diaper they tossed at me, and something inside me broke, but not in the way they expected. It was not weakness that filled me. It was fire. I bent down, changed my grandson's diaper with steady hands, and smiled quietly. Not because I was happy, not because I had accepted my fate, but because I knew something they didn't. While they saw me as powerless, I had a card stronger than all of them combined. That house, the one they strutted around in, the one they told their friends they had bought with their brilliance, still legally rested in my name. And with one phone call, I could take it all back. The diaper they handed me was not a humiliation. It was a trigger, a reminder that I had spent my entire life cleaning up their messes, from childhood tantrums to grown-man arrogance. They thought I was trapped under their roof, but they had no idea that it was them who were living under mine. And as I buttoned the baby's onesie and placed him gently in the crib, I made a silent vow. I would teach them a lesson no lecture could ever deliver. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't in raising your voice. It's in lowering your hand onto a pen, onto a document, onto the very deed that makes a man think he is powerful. But the moment I reached for my phone to make the call that would change everything, I heard a whisper outside the door. One of my sons. And what he said next froze me to my very bones. I wasn't always the kind of woman who could sign away millions with a stroke of a pen. In fact, most of my life was built on pennies pinched, nights spent awake, and hands blistered from work that no one else wanted to do. I was born in a small town in Ohio in 1949. My father was a coal miner, my mother a seamstress. Money was always short, but my parents taught me something no school ever could. That dignity and sacrifice were the only wealth a person could truly own. That lesson stayed with me through every hardship that followed. When I married Thomas, my late husband, I thought life had finally given me stability. He was charming, smart, and ambitious. But charm doesn't pay bills, and ambition without discipline is a curse. Thomas had ideas, plenty of them, grand businesses, quick investments, big risks. And each time, I was the one left to clean up when those dreams went up in smoke. I remember one winter when he invested everything into a trucking company that collapsed in 6 months. We had 2 young boys, Peter and James, and I had to work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I stitched clothes in the evenings, cleaned offices at night, and sold pies at the farmer's market on weekends. My hands ached, my back bent, but I never complained. Every sacrifice, I told myself, was for my children. When Thomas died suddenly from a stroke, I was left with nothing but debts. People whispered that I would lose the house, that my boys would grow up poor. But I refused to let that be their story. I sold off what little jewelry I had, mortgaged the house, and began investing carefully, stocks, real estate, and small businesses that most people overlooked. While others thought I was weak, I became sharper, wiser, and relentless. Years turned into decades. Quietly, steadily, I built wealth. I never flaunted it. I let my sons believe their education, their lifestyle, their fancy clothes came from scholarships and luck. They never knew it was me behind every tuition check, every car, every miracle. I wanted them to grow up strong, not spoiled. But perhaps that was my mistake. I gave them too much without letting them know its true cost. When they grew into men, married, and began families of their own, I thought my duty was complete. I thought my love had been enough. So when the opportunity came to fund the mansion, I made a choice. My sons wanted to impress their wives, and I wanted to give them stability. I purchased the land through a shell company, signed the contracts, and made sure the deed was in my name. But I let them believe they had accomplished it on their own. I sat in the lawyer's office as he asked me if I was certain about keeping my name on the deed. "It's better this way," I told him. "They don't need to know." "Not yet." He nodded, slid the papers toward me, and stamped them with a seal. That house, the marble floors, the grand staircase, the crystal chandeliers, was not built by their hands or wallets. It was built on my sacrifices, my late nights, my years of loneliness and backbreaking work. But now, as I sat there in the present day, diaper in hand, listening to my sons laugh in the kitchen about how good they had it, I realized something with a sharp sting. They had no respect because they thought they had earned everything themselves. Respect only exists when gratitude lives beside it. And my sons had none. That evening, as I walked down the polished hallway toward my bedroom, I overheard voices. My sons, Peter and James. "You think she'll last another year?" Peter asked, his voice cold. "She's old, tired," James replied. "We'll keep her busy with the kids until she's too weak to protest. Then the house will be ours." My heart thudded in my chest. My hands trembled against the wall. They weren't just ungrateful. They were planning to strip me of everything, to use me until I was nothing but a shadow. And right there, in that moment, I knew the diaper I had changed earlier that day wasn't just for the baby. It was the last diaper I would ever change for anyone ungrateful enough to think I was their servant. The next morning, I called my lawyer, and what he told me made me sit down hard on the edge of my bed, breathless. The lawyer's voice on the other end of the phone was steady, calm, yet the weight of his words nearly knocked the breath out of me. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "the deed is still in your name. Nothing has changed. If you choose to act, the entire property reverts fully to you with immediate effect. You don't even need their consent." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had known it in the back of my mind, but hearing it said out loud, that I still held absolute control over the $7.5 million mansion, sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just power. It was justice waiting to be delivered. "Thank you, David," I whispered. "I'll call you soon." I hung up before my sons could hear me. That day, I walked through the house differently. Not as a guest. Not as the fragile old woman they thought they could toss scraps to. I walked through it as its true owner. The chandelier above the dining room table? Mine. The sprawling backyard pool they bragged about at every barbecue? Mine. Even the kitchen island they left dirty with spilled coffee and crumbs? Still mine. But they didn't know. And I wasn't ready to tell them, not yet. Because before I struck, I needed to watch, to listen, to understand just how far their greed ran. It didn't take long. By the end of that same week, Peter had his wife, Angela, hand me a scribbled note with a list of chores. Babysitting times. Cooking instructions. Laundry reminders. As if I were their live-in maid. She handed it to me with a smile too sweet to be real, then walked away without a thank you. I stood there staring at the paper. My heart ached, not because of the work, but because of what it symbolized. I had raised these sons with everything I had. And now, instead of offering me peace in my last years, they were treating me like cheap labor. The next day, James's wife, Melissa, cornered me in the kitchen. "Mom," she said with a voice laced with fake affection, "it's really wonderful having you around. The children adore you. And with the price of nannies these days, well, you're saving us a fortune." Saving them a fortune. The words burned like acid. I bit my tongue, but inside me something shifted. I wasn't saving them a fortune. I was the fortune. Without me, there would be no house, no comfort, no good life. They were blind to the truth, but not for long. Still, I played along. I folded their laundry. I rocked the babies to sleep. I cooked their dinners. But every night, when I retreated to the small guest room they had shoved me into, the one far from the grand master suites they reserved for themselves, I opened my drawer, took out the deed, and stared at it. One call, I whispered to myself. One call, and everything changes. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. Peter was hosting friends by the pool. He walked around bragging about his mansion, laughing as he poured drinks, telling stories of how hard he worked to build this life. And then I heard him. "She's just here because she's too broke to live on her own," he said to a friend, nodding toward me where I sat in the shade with a baby. Free babysitting. Honestly, it's the only thing she's good for these days. Laughter erupted around the pool. My ears rang. My hands trembled as I clutched the stroller handle. Too broke. Only good for babysitting. They had taken my love, my sacrifice, and twisted it into mockery. That night, I made up my mind. I would no longer be silent. But my revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be in anger. It would be in precision. And so I began to prepare. Quietly.
Carefully. Strategically.
The first step was a bank call. I needed access to an account I hadn't touched in years. The second was contacting a realtor I trusted, someone who could appraise the property without alerting anyone. But just as I thought I was moving unseen, Melissa knocked on my bedroom door late one evening. Her face was sharp, her eyes suspicious. "Who were you talking to on the phone earlier, Mom?" she asked. I froze, because she had overheard more than I realized. Melissa's question hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. "Who were you talking to on the phone earlier, Mom?" Her eyes narrowed as if she were trying to read my very soul. Behind her polite smile was something sharper, a woman who had grown far too comfortable living on riches she hadn't earned. I swallowed hard, masking my heartbeat that pounded like a drum in my chest. "Just an old friend," I said softly. "We check on each other now and then." Melissa tilted her head, studying me as though I were a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. Then, without another word, she smirked and walked away. But her silence was worse than her questions. Because silence meant suspicion. From that night forward, I noticed subtle changes. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Phone calls were hushed behind closed doors. Angela and Melissa began spending more time together, whispering in corners and laughing when I passed by, their eyes darting toward me as if I were the butt of their private joke. And my sons? Peter and James were blind. Or maybe they chose to be. They had grown so arrogant that they didn't notice their wives weaving their own webs of control. One evening at dinner, Angela spoke up, her voice sweet but her words cutting. "Mom," she began, it might be best if you sign some documents, just in case anything happens. We don't want to deal with messy paperwork in the future. Don't you think it'd be easier if everything were already settled?" The table went quiet. My fork froze in midair. My sons didn't even blink. They just nodded along, as though her suggestion was perfectly reasonable. Settled. Documents. She wasn't talking about my peace of mind. She was talking about the house. About the deed. I smiled faintly and placed my fork down. "Don't worry," I said calmly. "Everything is already settled." Angela frowned, confused by my tone. Melissa glanced at her, eyebrows raised. They didn't press me further. But I knew then. They were circling like vultures. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with the deed in my lap. My fingers traced the embossed seal. My lawyer's words echoed in my mind. "You still own everything. One call, and it's yours again." But timing was everything. I didn't just want to take the house back. I wanted them to understand what they had done to me. I wanted them to feel the sting of disrespect they had so carelessly inflicted. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the mansion thickened. Angela began, handing me longer lists of chores. Melissa made passive remarks about how expensive it is to have another mouth to feed. And my sons? They laughed along. Each comment was a dagger. Still, I endured in silence. Because silence was my weapon. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was too old, too weak, too dependent. But every insult sharpened my resolve. Until one afternoon, I caught Melissa in my room. She was standing by my nightstand, rifling through my drawers. The deed was hidden beneath layers of folded sweaters, but I saw her hand hovering dangerously close. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low but firm. She jumped, spinning around with a fake smile plastered on her face.
Oh,
"I was just bringing you fresh towels. Must have dropped them in the wrong place." She chuckled nervously and backed out of the room. But I wasn't fooled.
she knew something.
She had sensed it in my voice that night by the phone. And if Melissa knew, Angela wouldn't be far behind. That evening, as I rocked my youngest grandchild to sleep, I made a decision. It was time to accelerate my plan. I called my lawyer again, but this time, instead of asking, I gave instructions. We began drawing up papers.
Quietly, discreetly.
And then, just as I thought I had everything under control, Angela cornered me in the kitchen the next morning. Her words froze me to the marrow. "Mom," she whispered, leaning close, "Melissa told me what you're hiding. If you think you're the owner of this house, you're making a very dangerous mistake." Angela's words cut through me like a blade. "If you think you're the owner of this house, you're making a very dangerous mistake." For a moment, I just stood there in the kitchen, the scent of coffee and burnt toast filling the silence. Angela's eyes didn't blink, didn't soften. She meant every word. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. I swallowed, keeping my face calm even though my heart thundered in my chest. "A mistake," I said softly. "I've made many in my life. But I assure you, Angela, this isn't one of them." She flinched at my confidence. Just slightly. Enough for me to know she didn't have the full picture. She was guessing, probing, fishing for cracks. Still, her words lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about babysitting or chores anymore. This was war. A silent war inside the walls of a mansion they thought they controlled. That night, as I lay awake in the small guest room they'd shoved me into, I replayed every moment of disrespect. My boys, who once clung to my skirts as children, now laughed at me behind my back. Their wives, who owed me their comfort, whispered about my usefulness. I had given them everything: education, stability, opportunities their father could never provide. And now, at 76 years old, I was reduced to a maid in the very house my sweat and sacrifice had built. No more. The next morning, while everyone was distracted with breakfast chaos, I slipped out to the garden with my phone. I called David, my lawyer, and my voice was steady, calm, controlled. "Proceed," I told him. "I want every document ready."
Quietly.
"And I don't want a soul in this house to know until it's too late." "Understood," he replied. His voice carried the kind of respect my sons had long forgotten to give me. For the next 2 weeks, I played my role. I rocked babies to sleep, stirred pots of stew, folded laundry. But behind every chore was a secret. I was moving money, signing papers, pulling strings. Every evening after the house grew quiet, I sat with my pen, adding my signature to documents that would change everything. And yet, while I worked in silence, so did they. Angela began pressing my sons to talk to me about plans. I overheard her one night. "She's not going to last forever," she whispered to Peter. "If you don't get her to sign something soon, we might lose everything. Don't you see? She has nothing else. All we need to do is push a little harder." James wasn't much better. Melissa had already filled his head with poison. "She owes us," I heard her hiss. "We've taken care of her all this time. The least she can do is make sure the house is secure for us." Secure. That was their favorite word. Secure for them, never for me. But what they didn't know was that I had already ensured security mine. One evening, after another long day of being ordered about, I sat in the living room rocking the baby. My sons lounged nearby, drinking wine, their wives perched on the couch. The conversation turned casual at first, but then Angela's voice sharpened. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk. It's about the future. About this house." I lifted my eyes from the baby's soft face. My hands were steady, though my heart raced. "What about it?" I asked. Melissa leaned forward, her smile too tight to be kind. It would give everyone peace of mind if you signed ownership over to the boys. That way, if anything happens to you, there won't be complications. Peter chimed in, his voice firm, almost commanding. It's not a big deal, Mom. Just paperwork. We'll take care of everything. James nodded. It's the logical thing to do. Logical. That word made me want to laugh. Nothing about this situation was logical. It was greedy, cruel, shameless. I rocked the baby one last time, then laid him gently in the crib. My eyes swept across all four of them, my sons, my daughters-in-law, and for the first time, I allowed a flicker of steel into my voice. No, I said. The silence that followed was deafening. Angela's mouth dropped open. Melissa's eyes flashed. Peter frowned as if he hadn't heard me correctly. No. James repeated, his voice tight. I straightened in my chair.
No.
This house is not yours. It never was. And it never will be. Their faces twisted in confusion, in shock, in fury. I could almost see the realization dawning in their eyes, that I knew something they didn't, that maybe the power wasn't in their hands after all. But before anyone could speak, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. It was David, my lawyer. The message on the screen made my lips curl into the smallest smile. It's done. Papers signed. The house is officially and fully under your control. I looked back up at my sons and their wives, their faces still waiting for my answer. And in that moment I knew. The game had just begun. The air in the living room felt heavy after my single word. No. Angela's lips parted as if to argue. Melissa's face hardened, and my sons looked as if they couldn't believe their ears. For years, I had been quiet, pliable, the old woman they could shuffle from one corner to another. But in that moment, I was no longer background noise. I was the storm. I don't understand, Peter said slowly, his glass of wine still hovering in his hand. What do you mean, no? You can't just. I can, I interrupted firmly, my voice sharper than they had ever heard from me. And I have. They exchanged looks, brows furrowed, lips tightening. Melissa leaned back on the couch, crossing her arms with a cold smile. You're bluffing, she said. You have nothing. You live here because we allow it. Don't forget that. Her arrogance almost made me laugh. I wanted to tell her that I had allowed her to live here all along, that every corner of this $7.5 million home had been placed into existence by my decisions, my sacrifices, my money. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I stood up slowly, letting my age show, letting them think I was fragile. Enjoy your evening, I said quietly. We'll revisit this conversation soon. And I left them in silence, my phone buzzing in my pocket with the message that confirmed what I already knew. This house was mine. Entirely mine. Over the next week, I began to shift the balance without ever raising my voice. The first move was subtle. I called the house staff, the gardener, the cleaning service, and redirected payments directly through my accounts. Quietly, they were told that their employment rested with me, not my sons. When Peter tried to schedule landscaping without consulting me, the gardener politely told him, "You'll need to speak with your mother." The look on Peter's face when he stormed into the kitchen afterward was priceless. "Why are they saying that?" he demanded. "Since when do they answer to you?" I just sipped my tea, smiled faintly, and said, "Since always." The second move was even quieter. I froze the secondary account my sons had been using for household expenses. When Angela tried to order new furniture, her card declined. When Melissa attempted to book a luxury weekend getaway, the payment bounced. I watched as frustration crept into their perfect little routines. They whispered at night, hissed at one another in corners. They couldn't figure out what had changed. Meanwhile, I kept playing the role of the gentle grandmother, folding laundry, preparing meals, singing lullabies to the little ones. But inside, I was sharpening my blade, step by step, and they didn't even know it. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. At dinner one evening, Angela snapped, "Mom, enough of this nonsense. We know you're hiding something. We know you've been making calls. Do you really think you can hold this house over us?" James slammed his fork down. If you don't sign those papers, don't expect us to keep you here. Melissa smirked. That's right. Maybe it's time you find another place to live. After all, we can't babysit you forever. Their laughter rang like nails on glass. But I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table, my voice low and steady. You want me gone? I asked. Peter sneered. If you won't cooperate, yes. Maybe you should leave. The children had gone quiet, their eyes darting from face to face. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp envelope, and slid it across the table. Read it. Peter snatched it up, ripped it open, and scanned the contents. His face drained of color. James leaned over his shoulder, his jaw tightening. Angela's smile faltered. Melissa's hands trembled, because in their hands was a legal document. One that spelled out in black and white that the property they lived in, the home they flaunted as theirs, was still owned entirely by me. The silence was deafening. You're lying, Melissa stammered. I met her eyes, with calm steel.
No.
I am simply reminding you of the truth. And if you think for one moment that I cannot reclaim what is mine, then you are the ones making a very dangerous mistake. They sat frozen, the reality sinking in. The ground beneath them had shifted, and they knew it. But what none of them knew was that I hadn't shown them everything. Not yet. The envelope was just the beginning. Because tucked safely in my lawyer's office was a second set of documents, ones that would not just give me back control of the house, but strip my sons and their wives of every ounce of comfort they had grown addicted to. And I was ready to use them. The silence that followed my revelation was unlike anything I had ever heard in that house. No laughter, no arrogance, no smug remarks. Just the sound of four people realizing their kingdom had been built on sand. Peter was the first to speak. His voice shook despite the anger he tried to lace it with. This can't be real. You're playing games, Mom. I didn't flinch. Games? I asked, my tone calm, almost soothing. No, Peter. This is the opposite of a game. This is reality. James snatched the papers from his brother's hands, scanning them as if searching for some loophole. His face paled, his lips pressed into a thin line. So all this time, he muttered. All this time, it was you? I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands.
Yes.
Every brick, every tile, every window. You thought it was your father's business deals. You thought it was luck. You thought it was your brilliance. But no, it was me. And I stayed quiet because I wanted to see the kind of men you would become. I hoped you'd grow humble, grateful, wise. But instead, Angela's chair screeched as she stood abruptly. You're trying to ruin us, she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. You waited until now to humiliate us. How dare you? Melissa jumped in, her voice sharp as glass. Do you think anyone will believe you? Do you think your sons will let you take everything away? But even as she spoke, I saw fear in her eyes. She knew the law didn't care about pride or arrogance. The law cared about ink and signatures. And those were mine. Peter turned on his wife. Did you know about this? His voice cracked, furious. Angela sputtered, caught off guard. Of course not. Do you think I'd let your mother keep something like this secret if I knew? James's eyes narrowed at Melissa. You've been snooping, haven't you? You said she was hiding something. Did you push her into this? Melissa glared back at him. Don't you dare blame me for your mother's lies. This is her doing, not mine. The room exploded into chaos. My sons snapped at their wives snapped back, and suddenly the perfect image of a family crumbled into shouting and accusations. I sat quietly, sipping my tea, watching the storm unfold. For years I had been their servant. Tonight I was their judge. But deep inside, my heart ached. Not because of the power struggle, not because of the house. What cut me was the realization that the boys I had sacrificed everything for had turned into men who saw me as a burden. And it took the threat of losing comfort for them to even look me in the eye. Still, I didn't let my sorrow show. I wore my mask of calm because I had one more card to play. When the shouting finally died down, I placed my teacup gently on the saucer and spoke. You can scream at each other all you want. You can call me names, accuse me, even despise me. But understand this house is mine. Legally, fully, and without question. I've allowed you to stay here. I've allowed you to live in comfort. But that allowance is ending. Melissa's face drained of color. Angela's hands trembled. My son sat stiff, caught between disbelief and fear. Peter finally found his voice, though it shook. So what now? You throw us all out on the street. I looked at him steadily, my voice quiet but firm. That depends on you. Because tomorrow morning, the papers will be filed. And once they are, this house won't just be mine in writing, it will be mine in action. The question is, where will you go when I decide your time here is finished? Their eyes widened. Angela gasped. Melissa's jaw fell open, because they realized in that moment that I wasn't bluffing. And tomorrow morning wasn't far away. Morning sunlight spilled into the kitchen as I stirred my tea. My sons and their wives shuffled in one by one, their faces tight from a sleepless night. No more jokes. No more arrogance. The silence was thick with fear. I set my cup down and slid a single envelope onto the table. David filed the papers this morning, I said evenly. This house is no longer under your illusion of ownership. It is mine again, fully and without question. Angela's hand shot out, snatching the envelope and tearing it open. Her eyes darted across the words, her face growing paler with every line. She slammed it down. This can't stand. You can't just take everything away from us. I looked at her, calm as stone. I didn't take anything. I gave it. And now, I'm simply reclaiming what you've proven you don't deserve. Melissa scoffed, but her voice wavered. You think you can run this house? You think you can handle everything on your own at your age? My lips curved into the faintest smile. At my age, I've learned something important. Control isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about holding the keys. And, my dear, I hold them all. Peter's fists clenched at his sides. So what now, Mom? You kick us out? Throw your own children onto the street? Is that what this is about? His words stung, but not because they were true. They stung because he twisted the story into something I wasn't. No, I said softly. This isn't about revenge. This is about respect. Something I gave you endlessly. Something you never gave back. James's voice cracked with desperation. We're your sons. You can't do this to us. I met his eyes, and for the first time in years, I let my pain show. I already did everything for you. And you repaid me with mockery, with orders, with threats. Don't speak of what I can or cannot do. I have been your mother all my life. But I am not your servant. Not anymore. The weight of my words silenced them. For a moment no one moved. Even the children, too young to understand, sat unusually still. Then Melissa's mask cracked. Her voice rose high, shrill, desperate. You can't mean this. Where will we go? What will we tell people? We'll be humiliated. Angela's eyes burned with rage. You planned this all along, didn't you? You pretended to be weak just so you could crush us now. I tilted my head.
No.
I pretended to be weak, so I could see your true selves. And what I saw was greed, arrogance, disrespect. That's what crushed you, not me. Their fury collapsed into panic. Whispers turned to arguments. Peter blamed Angela, saying she pushed too hard. James accused Melissa of snooping and making things worse. The wives shot back, blaming my silence, saying I had tricked everyone. The house that once rang with their laughter now vibrated with chaos. And in the middle of it all, I sat with my tea, calm, unshaken. For the first time in years, I wasn't the weakest voice in the room. I was the only voice that mattered. Then the doorbell rang. Everyone froze. I stood, walked slowly to the front door, and opened it. Standing there was a man in a suit, David, my lawyer, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. He handed me a folder. Mrs. Henderson, as requested, the papers have been executed. You now have the full legal authority to enforce removal if necessary. Gasps filled the air behind me. Angela clutched her chest. Melissa's knees buckled. My son stared, pale and stunned, as the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am," one of them said respectfully, "just give the word, and we'll begin the process." I turned back to face my family, their mouths open, their faces drained, their world collapsing around them. And with the folder in my hand, I asked the one question that made their fears spill into the open. "Which one of you will pack first?" The living room felt colder than winter itself. My family sat stunned, eyes darting from the folder in my hands to the two officers standing silently in the doorway. For years, they believed I was powerless. In one morning, I had pulled the ground out from beneath their feet. Angela was the first to speak. Her voice cracked with fury. "You can't do this to us. We're family." I looked at her, calm but unyielding. "Family?" I repeated softly. "Family doesn't chain their mother to babysitting duties. Family doesn't whisper about when she'll die so they can steal her house. Family doesn't laugh while stripping away her dignity. If this is what you call family, then no, I owe you nothing." Melissa stood, shaking, her voice shrill. "Think about the children. You can't just throw us out with them watching." I rose slowly, my eyes never leaving hers. "Don't you dare use those children as shields for your greed." I raised mine without luxury, without mansions, without servants. If they've grown too soft to survive without my sacrifice, then that is your failure, not mine. Peter slammed his hand on the table. "Mom, enough. We'll fight this in court. You can't just decide to ruin our lives." David, my lawyer, stepped forward. "Actually, she can. The deed is solely in her name, the filings have been executed, and the court has already acknowledged her ownership. If you attempt to challenge this, you'll only lose more. My advice? Gather your things." James looked pale, broken, like a boy caught in a storm. His voice was almost a whisper. "Where will we go?" I felt a flicker of sorrow then, the mother in me fighting against the woman who had been humiliated for too long. But I pushed it down. They had made their choice when they chose greed over gratitude. "That," I said softly, "is no longer my concern." The arguments erupted like thunder. Melissa cried, Angela screamed, Peter cursed, James begged. The officers stood firm, waiting for my signal. For once, I wasn't drowned out by their voices. I was the storm itself. When the shouting reached its peak, I raised my hand. The room fell silent. "You have 72 hours, I said firmly. 72 hours to pack your belongings and leave. If you are not gone by then, these officers will escort you out. And believe me when I say, I will not hesitate." Angela gasped. Melissa shook her head in disbelief. My sons stared at me as though seeing me for the first time in their lives. I turned to David. "Make sure everything is secured," I said. He nodded, already pulling more papers from his briefcase. The rest of the day was chaos. Angela stormed into the bedroom, slamming drawers, muttering about betrayal. Melissa called her parents, her voice sharp with panic. Peter paced like a trapped wolf, muttering about lawyers and loopholes. James sat in the corner, his head in his hands, silent for once. And me? I walked the halls quietly, reclaiming each room in my mind. This was my house, my sanctuary, my victory. But that night, as I settled into bed, a sound woke me. A creak on the floorboard outside my room. A shadow under the door. I froze.
My heart hammered in my chest.
Because as I listened closely, I realized it wasn't just one shadow. There were two, whispering, plotting. And when I caught the faint words, Angela's voice hissing, "If she won't give it, we'll take it," I knew my war was not over. It was about to get dangerous. The whisper outside my door lingered in my mind all night. Angela's voice, sharp with venom. "If she won't give it, we'll take it." I barely slept. My heart pounded, not out of fear, but out of clarity. They had finally said aloud what I already knew. Respect was never in their hearts. All they wanted was control. By morning, I was ready. I walked into the kitchen where they sat, their faces pale from another sleepless night. Angela's eyes were dark, Melissa's lips pressed tight, Peter's jaw clenched, and James looked hollow. The children played quietly in the corner, oblivious to the storm around them. I placed a single folder on the table. My voice was calm. "I heard you," I said. "Last night. Plotting. Whispering. If you thought you could scare me, you should have remembered something. I've already lived through storms bigger than you." Angela stiffened. "You misunderstood." "No." I cut her off, my tone sharp. "I understood perfectly. You've mistaken my kindness for weakness. You thought the years I spent in silence meant I had no voice left. But silence is not weakness, it's patience. And my patience is gone." Melissa's voice cracked. "You'll regret this. You can't just throw us into the street." I leaned forward, my eyes burning into hers. "Do you want to know what I regret? I regret raising sons who let their wives humiliate me in the house I built. I regret loving so much that I hid my power just to protect your pride. I regret believing gratitude could grow where greed had already taken root." Peter slammed the table. "Enough. You're destroying this family." My chest tightened, but I stood taller. "No, Peter. You destroyed this family the moment you treated me like a servant instead of your mother. You destroyed it when you laughed about me behind my back, when you let your wives hand me chore lists as if I were their maid. I didn't destroy anything. I simply revealed the truth." I opened the folder and slid its contents toward them. Eviction papers. Ironclad. Signed and sealed. "You have until tomorrow," I said. "Not 72 hours. Tomorrow. By noon. If you're still here, the sheriff will carry you out." Angela's face twisted in fury. Melissa broke into tears. Peter stood, fists trembling. James lowered his head, silent tears sliding down his face. For the first time, they saw me not as a fragile old woman, but as what I had always been, the foundation of their lives. The hours that followed were chaos. Boxes dragged across floors, arguments hissed through hallways, the sound of children crying as their parents tried to explain what they couldn't understand. The house shook not from its walls, but from the collapse of arrogance inside it. By evening, their cars were packed. Suitcases stacked on the driveway. Angela glared at me one last time, spitting words like poison. "You'll die alone in that big house." I looked at her calmly. Better alone with dignity than surrounded by greed. Melissa sobbed as James tried to console her, though his own face was broken with shame. Peter muttered curses under his breath, but his hands shook as he slammed the trunk shut. And then, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, the cars rolled down the driveway. The mansion grew quiet again, eerily, beautifully quiet. I stood in the doorway, the deed in my hand, and felt the weight lift off my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a burden. I was Margaret Henderson, 76 years old, survivor of a life of sacrifice and the rightful owner of everything they had tried to steal. I walked through the empty halls, each step echoing with freedom. The chandeliers sparkled, the marble floors gleamed, and I whispered to myself, "This is not revenge. This is justice." And yet, deep inside, I wasn't without sorrow. They were my sons, my blood, and I had hoped, once, that love would be enough. But life had taught me a lesson I wanted the world to hear. Love without respect is slavery. Sacrifice without gratitude is theft. And silence, when abused, becomes a weapon sharper than any sword. That night, I sat in the grand dining room alone, sipping my tea. The house was mine again. My peace was mine again. My dignity was mine again. And though the world outside might never know the full story, I did. And for me, that was enough. To every woman listening, to every grandmother, to every mother who has ever been silenced, never forget your worth. Never let anyone, no matter how close, treat your love as currency. Because you are more powerful than they will ever know. To be continued in your own life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs the reminder. Your silence is not weakness, it's strength waiting for the right moment.